Hi, welcome to Bene Narras, episode 2, where we're going to discuss all things Latin writing and books.
I am Rachel Cunning, and I live on a mountain.
I'm Arianne Belzer-Carroll, and I don't live in a mountain, but I am adjusting the angle of my laptop with my shoe right now, which we never talked about again. Rachel.
Let's hope not. Let's instead maybe talk about books.
Okay. Rachel, what are you reading this week?
So I just got from the library the book Would Like to Meet, and I haven't started it yet, but I'm going to start it tonight. So that's what I'm going to read next, and I'm looking forward to it.
Okay.
What about you? I
am reading nothing right now, and I need to do better because, like we said last time, being a good writer has a lot to do with being a good reader. So the next time we record, I will have an answer for you that is better than this one.
Reasonable. So since you don't have a story or you're not reading one, what is our story today, right now?
You do such a good job of that. Our story is brainstorming. We're going to talk about brainstorming. There's a super real art to brainstorming.
And I love storms and brains.
You do.
Love them.
You do.
Yes.
You brought
and
your
I think
legal
I
pad.
mentioned that, yeah, that I was an aficionado of the yellow legal pad. So I have brought my yellow legal pad, and I'm going to talk through some of the things that are my thought processes when I start. Usually the first thing I do actually is like write a list of every story I might possibly be interested in telling right now. Mm-hmm. And then I look at the list and I think about the list, and usually one jumps out at me. I'm like, this is the story I want to write right now. And then from there,
oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
For me, when I make those lists, often I'm thinking about like what holes do I have in my classroom that I really need to fill. We wrote Fortuna because my kids really wanted me to read to them about a volcano, and I had nothing about volcanoes, and so we wrote it. So as you're brainstorming, you can think about like what you personally, either what you're really interested in or what you personally would really like to have in your classroom, what tools you would find useful.
Yeah. And for me, it's like, what do I want to sit down to write? Because writing can be hard enough anyway, without dragging yourself through a story that you really don't want to tell. It's like the research paper you never wanted to write, except it's in a different language as a story. But speaking of that, you do lots of research when you're brainstorming. So this is my pad for Domini Secretum. And you might be able to see it, you might not, I don't know. But I usually start with lots of questions. And since I knew that I wanted this character to be a slave, one of the questions I asked myself was, well, how much money does he need if he's going to try to buy himself out of slavery? Mm-hmm. And I'm going to tell you, that research did not make it into the book.
No,
neither did the phrase.
Like you end up knowing a whole lot more about your characters and about your plot than you ever tell anyone. And that's A-okay. That's part of editing, is knowing what to say and what not to.
Yeah. But part of it is also like having at least some context of what you're writing in. So I knew that a mine was going to be really important to the story, and I knew that slaves were sent to the mines, but I didn't know much more beyond that. So I read a little bit about mining in Rome. I also didn't know the word for mine in Latin, so I had to look that up. I didn't know that. So part of my brainstorming process.
And you learned a really interesting phrase from that too.
Yeah, Dimnati in metallum. Metallum. Yeah. That's not awkward at all.
And part of brainstorming is asking yourself if you have the language to tell the story.
Yeah. And then I started writing Pegasus, which I'm really excited about. And I knew the word for like bridle for rain, but I didn't know how to say it, like flap your wings. So I had to look that up because that was going to be important in my story.
What is it?
So yeah, when I write, I start kind of sprawling out sideways, leftways, pageways on legal pad. I look at stories. When I was reading Medea, I looked at summaries of her myths. I read her poem in the Heroides, and I tried to get a feel about what other people had said about her before I said, "You are mine, and how am I going to make you my own?" So those are things that I do when I start brainstorming. Yes.
Like, how do you flap your wings?
It's the same as clap, which is awesome. So if you were to say I flap my wings, ego plaudo alis.
Okay, okay, cool. And you learn something new every time you sit down to write something. Because, I mean, like we
It's
said,
true.
it's not just ideas, it's also where am I going to go with this? And it's also the research that you're doing. And so you're reading a whole lot into stories that already exist, and learning some cool language. When you were doing Cupido Msuke, I remember reading some cool language from Apuleius that you were doing about bald pumpkins. Bald pumpkins?
Yeah.
These bald
One of
pumpkins.
the insults is saying that he's bald like a pumpkin. And I was like, I can use that. And then there was tragically so much that I couldn't use, and I had to force myself to cut. And part of that's part of the writing process, but part of the brainstorming process is going through and saying, hey, what do I like? And I really liked the phrase that she fell down like a cadaver,
Yeah.
but I couldn't use it because I couldn't convince myself that cadaver was a clearly recognizable cognate to a high school student.
Well, and when you brainstorm, we mentioned this briefly earlier, but when you brainstorm, you're going to end up with a ton of stuff that never makes it in. And that's going to be phrases, it's going to be terms, it's going to be, do you know how much I know about boats? I had to learn about boats. I think I ended up writing like 3 sentences about boats, but man, I know about boats. It's going to be research and way more detail than you actually need. It's going to be, like you said, damnati and metallum. And sometimes it does make it in, like alis flaudo becomes really important. And so brainstorming can also just be the language that you need. And that's really particular to writing in a, in a target language. But it's true for us that we
And
need
then
to make sure that we
sometimes
have. Yeah.
it is vocab.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really into vocab and word frequency lists, and part of that's my background in assessments, but I'm really into it. So for my most recent book, where I knew I was going to be really tight on the vocab, I went through the list of top 1,000 words, jotting down ones that I thought might be relevant.
Which list were you using?
I use the Dickinson, the DCC Dickinson College Commentaries list.
Yeah, that's super easy to look up.
It is. It's online and it's magical.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I also sometimes like to look at idioms and flip through like an idiom book to be like, which idiom might be something that I can steal and use a lot that would be important to the theme that I want to write about. That's a little farther along in my brainstorming process, but it's one that I do also.
It is crazy important and not something I think that people think about a lot. I haven't published Dido yet. I'm in the middle of writing something called Dux Femina Facti. And the idea is to give Dido her voice back. And is it okay if I share what my brainstorming looks like?
Please.
Okay, cool. Not everyone brainstorms like this. So you'll see the first thing here is sources that I want to make sure to use. And some of these are sources that nobody ever looks at. And some of them are sources that are fairly common, like the Aeneid. And so I want to make sure that I'm reading those sections, and I want to make sure that I'm reading the context for those things. When I read them, I'm making notes about characterization. I'm making notes about themes. I'm making notes about words and phrases that are in there that I really want to pull out. All over my novella is the phrase solve corde metum, which is something that Dido says when the Trojans arrive. And I wanted to really give that to her. The idea of being fearless, of dissolving fear from your heart. And so I took the Latin that already existed, and I included it in my process for what I wanted my novella to look like. I make a list of themes. This one I ended up removing. I removed Juno, and it became really important to me to remove Juno. So, I mean, you can see like in my brainstorming already, there's stuff that never makes it in, and that's okay. The themes are really important for me, and I know they're really important for you, that you make a note of themes, because it ties things together and gives me guideposts, and I think does the same for you. You can note my technical usage of the term nutweasel. I don't like Pygmalion very much.
Kind of a jerk.
He really is. But we can talk about that later. He's awful. But yep. This is something that I knew was going to happen. It resolved in a scene about a discus that's like 5 chapters long. But I knew going in that was something that was really important for her and developmental for her character. I knew that I really wanted to take the scene where the Trojans are at dinner at the beginning of their arrival, and that I really wanted to give that to her, give a reflection of that to her as a child. Here's some notes on chronology. Descriptions of overarching plot ideas. What do I do with Alyssa for 7 years that Pygmalion is king? This is a question that I need to answer for myself. I still don't know, in case you're interested. But I do. I make lists of problems that I might run into, questions that I have, ideas that I want to include. And I do it by typing straight, where Rachel sort of makes maps that explode.
Yeah. Yes. And I do make maps. I've got my Pegasus part of my yellow legal pad up now. And I think we both do this. We've talked about with looking at resources, especially when you're telling a story that's kind of already been told and making it your own. I was looking at stories about Pegasus and stories about, this name vexes me. Let's see if I can get it. Bellerophon.
You're good. You're doing it right.
Regardless. Yeah. So, so I looked at even just fragments, and I saw that there was a fragment of the Euripides, which hopefully you can see, and was like, oh, that's really cool. That's about blasphemy. I wonder if I can bring that in. We don't know a lot about that in blasphemy. And so then I drew that down as an arrow, as a plot point for a critical juncture in the book, as a way that we can take this increasing tension and push it further. And I stole it and I loved it.
Well, it really creates a link with the original text, which is super important if that's something that teachers want to do, is help connect back to texts that already exist. But it also helps so much in story development.
It is so true. And we're probably going to keep talking about that over a long period of time, because Bene Narras is about the writing process, which is quite the process.
It really is.
So we're going to talk next time about 5 idioms that are super useful for conversation, both your own and in your writing.
And it can give some color and depth to what you're writing and sort of bring it to life. Before we do that, I want to leave people with one last piece of advice, which is put something on the page. What you put on the page, what you put on the page may not be there forever. The first thing that you write down, you might not keep. But it's a lot easier to keep writing than it is to start writing. Put something on the page.
I was afraid for years to write a story in Latin, even though I majored in creative writing and studied Latin.
Yeah.
And until my husband was like, please write me a textbook for my class. I don't have anything. I hate writing. And I was like, okay. And then I did.
You wrote something down. and it took editing. Right. And we worked through it. And now it exists. So yeah.
It exists.
Idioms next time.
Put something on the page. You got to start somewhere.
Idioms next time. And until then, from us and Erasmus, scribite bonis auvibus.
Fagate valiatus.